You know, we often talk about the butterfly effect in history.
Right, where a butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil and causes a tornado in Texas.
Exactly. It is a nice metaphor for how subtle actions have big consequences. But today we are looking at something that is basically the complete opposite of subtle.
Yeah, there is nothing subtle about steam shovels and dynamite.
No, definitely not. We are looking at what happens when you take thousands of workers and dig a massive trench in a jungle 1,500 miles away and watch how that single act of brute force literally erases the name of a town in Florida.
It really is a fascinating study in cause and effect,
Right.
but not the linear kind we usually learn in school.
Right. So for everyone listening, we are doing a deep dive today into Chapter 7 of the historical text stories of St. Andrews.
And honestly, this isn't really a story about engineering. I mean, at least not entirely. It is a story about speculation. It is about FOMO.
Fear of missing out?
Exactly. FOMO hitting the Gulf Coast in 1908. Because narratives really move markets.
FOMO in the early 20th century. I love that framing because usually when we talk about the Panama Canal, we talk about Teddy Roosevelt standing on a steam shovel.
Or the logs, the massive concrete logs.
Right, the locks. But we rarely talk about the ripple effects that washed up on American shores before the canal was even finished.
That is the key here. We are looking at how the idea of the Panama Canal, before a single ship even sailed through it, acted like a gravitational field.
It just warped everything around it.
It warped the economy, the geography, and the identity of the Florida Gulf Coast. Specifically how it took a historic, quiet fishing village called St. Andrews and just pulled it into the orbit of international commerce.
Whether it wanted to go or not.
Yeah, pretty much.
So our mission today, as we dig into these historical narratives, is to connect the dots between a mosquito-infested jungle in Central America and a boardroom in the Florida Panhandle.
It is quite a journey.
It is. And just a quick heads up for you listening, especially if you really know this local history, we are focusing strictly on Chapter 7 today, which is the canal story.
Right, the macro forces.
Exactly. We know there is a really fascinating book by Nancy Hudson called George Mortimer West, His Path in History, that dives into his personal diaries.
He is a huge figure in this.
Massive. But we are going to save the deep dive on the man himself for Chapter 8. So next time. Today, we are looking at the movement he helped create.
Makes sense. Because to understand those forces, we really have to zoom out.
Yeah.
Way out.
Because before the Panama Canal was a construction project, it was basically science fiction.
It was the big dream for centuries.
Hmm.
Every empire worth its salt looked at a map of the Western Hemisphere and absolutely hated it.
I mean, you have this thin strip of land, the Isthmus of Panama.
Right, just blocking the Atlantic from the Pacific.
Yeah.
If you wanted to move a ship from New York to San Francisco, you had to sail 14,000 miles around Cape Horn.
Down at the tip of South America.
Exactly. Which is not exactly a pleasure cruise.
No, that is dangerous waters, massive delays, and huge fuel costs.
It is a logistician's absolute nightmare. Now, the French were the first to try to fix it in the 1880s with some serious industrial muscle.
They brought in Ferdinand de Lesseps, right?
Yeah, the guy who built the Suez Canal. He was basically the engineering celebrity of his day.
So he rolls into Panama thinking, I did this in Egypt, I can do it here.
That was the mindset. His plan was to dig a sea-level ditch, no locks, just a straight channel connecting two oceans.
But Panama isn't a desert in Egypt.
Far from it.
That seems like a massive oversight on his part.
It was complete hubris. I mean, the geography of Panama is mountainous, the rainfall is torrential, and the rivers are just incredibly volatile.
You can't just dig a ditch through a mountain range that gets 10 feet of rain a year.
No, you really can't. But the real killer wasn't the dirt, it was the biology. The French just didn't understand that mosquitoes carried yellow fever and malaria.
Right, this was before the germ theory really took hold regarding vectors. They thought it was bad air, right?
It's exactly miasma. So they were essentially digging their own graves. They lost over 20,000 lives and went completely bankrupt.
It was a catastrophe.
A total disaster.
So the French pack up, leaving behind all this rusting machinery in a half-dug ditch. And the dream just sits there.
Just rotting in the jungle.
But then, the sources for this chapter highlight a very specific cinematic moment that completely changed the calculus for the United States.
It shifts the canal from a commercial nice-to-have to a we will die without this necessity.
Right, the year is 1898, the Spanish-American War.
The U.S. is fighting Spain in the Caribbean. But one of the Navy's biggest assets, the battleship USS Oregon, is stationed way out in the Pacific.
And the clock is ticking. The war is happening right now.
The War Department orders the Oregon to the Caribbean. It takes off at full steam, but it has to go the long way around South America.
And the public is following this, right?
Oh yeah, the American public is reading about this in the newspapers day by day. Where is the organ? Will it get there in time?
And how long did it take?
It took 66 grueling days.
66 days. So by the time they show up,
The war is basically over. The Battle of Santiago Bay was effectively finished. The ship missed the party.
wow. But the lesson landed hard in Washington.
Extremely hard. A two-ocean nation cannot defend itself with a one-ocean navy. If the U.S. was going to be a true global power, it needed the shortcut.
So when Teddy Roosevelt steps in, it is not about shipping bananas.
Not at all. It is about national defense, pure geopolitics.
And the Americans did two things differently, according to the notes. First, they went to war with the mosquitoes.
Which was absolutely crucial. William Gorgas and his sanitation teams went in and drained the swamps. They paved the roads. They screened the windows.
They eradicated the vectors.
Exactly. And second, they completely changed the engineering. They abandoned the French sea level idea.
They realized you have to work with the terrain, not against it.
Right. So they dammed the Chagres River to create Gatun Lake, which was the largest man-made lake in the world at the time, by the way.
Wow.
And they used a system of massive locks to lift ships up 85 feet, sail them across the lake, and lower them down the other side.
So it is essentially a water bridge.
A huge water bridge over the mountains.
Okay, so the dirt is flying in Panama. The engineering puzzle is solved. The world knows this thing is actually going to open.
And this triggers what the historians in our source material call canal fever.
Canal fever. I love that term.
It is very accurate. This is where the story pivots back to Florida. You have to imagine investors sitting in Chicago or New York just staring at a map.
They know the canal is opening in 1914.
They know that goods from China, from California, from South America are going to flow through that canal and head straight toward the American Midwest.
So they need a door to enter the country.
Exactly. They need a port, the gateway to the canal.
That was the billion-dollar title everyone wanted.
Everyone. Mobile, New Orleans, and Pensacola, they were all essentially auditioning for the role. And then you have St. Andrews Bay.
Now, let's set the scene for St. Andrews. Around 1905, 1906. Because this wasn't exactly an industrial metropolis waiting to happen.
Far from it. St. Andrews was a charming, very historic community. It had been there for a long time.
It was a working waterfront, right?
Yeah, fishing boats, saltworks timber. It was very self-sufficient, but it was hyper-local. It looked inward at the bay, not outward at the global economy.
Enter George Mortimer West.
The man with the plan.
Now, again, we were saving his personal diaries for Chapter 8, but we have to talk about him here because he is the architect of the rebrand.
He really is. He looks at the map and he sees a problem. Not with the water. St. Andrews Bay is naturally deep and very well protected.
The problem is the marketing.
Specifically, the name of the growing settlement just east of St. Andrews, it was called Harrison.
Harrison. I mean, no offense to any Harrisons listening, but it sounds like an accountant.
It does.
It doesn't really sound like a gateway to global trade.
It is a respectable name.
Yeah.
But Harrison doesn't scream future hub of the Americas.
Right.
George West and other local boosters realized that if they wanted to attract the railroads, which they desperately needed to connect the port to the north, they needed a narrative.
They needed to plant a flag in the mind of the investors.
Exactly. So in what has to be one of the most audacious identity pivots in municipal history, they decide to completely rename the town.
So in 1909, Harrison is out.
And Panama City is in.
Panama City. It is brilliant, really.
It is pure 20th century boosterism. West had this geometric argument that he would pitch to anyone who would listen. He would take a ruler and draw a straight line from Chicago.
The industrial heart of America.
Right down to the Panama Canal.
And let me guess where that line went.
It sliced right through St. Andrews Bay.
Wow. So he was telling the rail barons, we aren't just a random town in Florida. We are the geometric inevitable partner to the canal.
You nailed it. By taking the name Panama City, they were positioning themselves as the northern terminus of the canal itself.
They were saying, we are the American side of this coin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was designed to capture the imagination of the people holding the checkbooks.
It feels like a modern startup pitch deck, like we are the Uber of canals.
Basically, yes.
But do people actually buy it? I mean, it seems almost too obvious.
It worked incredibly well to generate hype. The Panama City branding created a real sense of destiny, and more importantly, it attracted the specific piece of infrastructure they needed.
The Atlanta and St. Andrews Bay Railway.
Yes, known locally as the Bay Line.
The Bay Line, completed in 1908.
And that is the crucial link. A deep harbor is totally useless if you can't get the cargo off the boat and onto a train heading to Chicago.
So the canal narrative justified the huge expense of building that railroad through the Florida pine
All
forests.
right, they were building the infrastructure for a boom that hadn't even happened yet.
Okay, so the table is set, the name is changed, the rails are laid. The canal finally opens in August 1914. I just picture the people of the newly christened Panama City standing on the docks, champagne in hand, waiting for the global fleet to arrive.
And then nothing happened.
Serious
It
anticlimax.
was a massive reality check. The Panama Canal opened in August 1914, but August 1914 is also the start of World War I.
Oh, right. The Archduke gets shot and the whole world just goes up in flames.
The entire global order collapsed. Trade routes were disrupted. Ships were requisitioned for the war effort in Europe.
So all those commercial ships just vanished.
The golden age of trade that West and the others predicted was put on indefinite hold.
That must have been devastating for them. I mean, they bet the farm on this.
It was a huge letdown. In fact, the sources mention a 1915 federal review where the U.S. government looked at St. Andrews Bay and basically said, why should we spend money dredging this harbor?
Because there are no ships.
Right. They said there was no traffic here. They questioned if a deep water port was even economically justified anymore.
So the bubble burst?
Well, not exactly. And this is the subtle brilliance of what happened. The ships didn't come immediately, but the mindset had already shifted.
The idea of the canal.
Yes. The idea of the canal had fundamentally changed how the land was valued and how the community saw itself.
Meaning they stopped thinking like fishermen and started thinking like industrialists.
Correct. Waterfront property was no longer just scenic land where you dry your nets. It was now strategic industrial reserve.
That is huge shift.
It is. The identity of the region had hardened around the concept of being a maritime logistics hub. They didn't pack up and go back to being Harrison. They doubled down.
And this brings us to the tension between the neighbors. This is really where the story of St. Andrews takes a turn. You have St. Andrews, the historic independent village, and this upstart, aggressively named Panama City right next door.
It is the classic big fish eats little fish scenario, but driven by what economists might call agglomeration.
Explain that a bit.
Well, to compete with massive ports like Mobile or New Orleans, the region needed a unified front. They needed a single, powerful tax base and administrative center to lobby for federal dollars.
So St. Andrews was on the menu.
In a way, yes. The economic gravity was pulling everything toward that port city concept. So in 1926, the annexation process began.
And it finalized a year later, right?
By 1927, Panama City formally annexed the historic communities of St. Andrews and Millville.
I imagine that was pretty bittersweet for the locals. St. Andrews had its own history, its own vibe, for lack of a better word, and suddenly it is just a neighborhood in someone else's city.
It was definitely a trade-off. They lost their municipal sovereignty. They weren't their own town anymore. But they gained a permanent seat at the table of this much larger economic engine.
The sources describe it as St. Andrews being pulled into the gravitational field of the canal boom.
They just couldn't escape the orbit of the larger narrative.
So for decades, it basically looks like a bad bet. They changed the name, they built the rail, they lost their independence, and the harbor was still relatively quiet compared to places like New Orleans.
It was a long waiting game.
When did the payoff finally arrive?
It took another global crisis, World War II.
The Wainwright shipyard.
This is the ultimate proof of concept. When the U.S. entered World War II, the demand for shipping tonnage was insatiable. They desperately needed ships, specifically Liberty ships.
Can you explain what a Liberty ship is?
Yeah.
I have heard the term, but was it a battleship?
No, they were the workhorses of the war. Ugly, slow cargo ships designed to carry tanks, jeeps, grain, and ammo to the Allies.
Just floating warehouses, basically.
Essentially, they were designed to be built incredibly fast, prefabricated sections just welded together. But you needed a massive deep water facility to launch them.
And because of that canal fever 30 years prior, St. Andrews Bay was ready.
Exactly. They had the deep water, they had the rail connection to bring in the steel from Birmingham in the north.
The Bay Line finally paying off.
Big time. The Wainwright shipyard in St. Andrews ended up employing thousands of people and producing over 100 Liberty ships.
Over 100. That is an insane amount of industrial output for what used to be a quiet fishing village.
It completely transformed the region. It brought a population explosion and cemented Panama City as a genuine maritime hub.
Which was the dream all along.
But here's the kicker, and really the main lesson of Chapter 7. If George West hadn't drawn that line on the map, in 1909.
If they hadn't chased the canal dream and built the railroad.
Right, that shipyard likely never would have been built there.
So the rebranding of 1909 actually won the war of the 1940s.
In a roundabout way, yes. The speculative ambition of the past enabled the industrial capacity of the future.
It is so fascinating to look at St. Andrews today with this context. The book mentions that despite being swallowed up politically, St. Andrews didn't lose its soul. It didn't become some concrete wasteland.
It really didn't. It managed to retain that walkable, historic village feel.
Yeah.
You still have the marina, the old oaks.
But it is a village that exists inside a city that exists because of a trench in Panama.
It is layers of history just stacked on top of each other.
It really challenges the way we think about cause and effect. We always want history to be simple. You know, A leads to B.
But this is A leads to B, which fails, but creates the infrastructure for C.
Which creates D 30 years later.
That is the narrative ripple effect. The expert takeaway here from these sources is that stories, whether they are marketing stories or national defense stories, are infrastructure.
They are just as real as the concrete locks in the canal.
Exactly. They shape where we live, what our towns are named, and what jobs are available 3 generations later.
Speaking of names, I can't help but wonder about that. We just accepted Panama City as normal. It is just a name on a highway sign now. But it was a pitch. It was literally a 1909 startup pitch.
It was a very successful pitch. It erased Harrison from the map so effectively that most people today have absolutely no idea it ever existed.
That is wild.
It shows you that geography isn't just about rocks and water. It is about imagination.
Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive into Chapter 7. It is a powerful reminder that our local history is never just local. We are always tied to the big global machine.
We are all part of the web. And I think this sets us up perfectly for the next deep dive.
Absolutely. Next time we are going to open the diaries, we are going to look at the man behind the curtain, George Mortimer West.
We will see what he was actually thinking while he was drawing those lines on the map.
I can't wait. The personal side of the story is just as wild as the economic side. But before we let you go, here is the thought I want to leave you with.
A provocative thought.
Yes. We saw how the narrative of the Panama Canal, a piece of global infrastructure, was strong enough to rename a town and force an annexation a century ago.
A powerful narrative.
So look around you today. What are the canal narratives of our time? Is it the AI corridor? Is it climate resilience? What are the global ideas that are currently rebranding our neighborhoods and reshaping our cities without us even noticing? Are we living in Harrison right before it becomes Panama City?
That is the real question.
Yeah.
We usually don't know the new name until the sign is already painted.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We will see you on the next one.